Thanks for joining our integrated law briefing. I'm Varun Mehta, the CEO here at Factor Law. I said this once before, but I would encourage everyone to try and jump on via video. It really will encourage more of a discussion. While we do have some presentation in the beginning, we definitely want this to be more of a discussion as the conversation continues. So before we jump in, a couple of housekeeping notes. We're going to have about 20 to 30 minutes of kind of upfront presentation where we want to share a little bit about our point of view. We call it our hard-earned perspective on the market that should initiate some dialogue, debate, and discussion with each and every one of you. Then the rest of our time, we're going to design for feedback, reaction, and dialogue. We recently just did these actually in person in New York and London, but we wanted to have an opportunity to do this virtually. So this is the first time we're not doing this with cocktails and kind of a physical setting. But the dialogue was great, and we're really excited to bring this to you guys virtually, and hopefully we can keep the discussion going. We're really looking for people to come in with some feedback here. Some ground rules today should be open. It should be a candid conversation, and we encourage each and every one of your participation as commentators and individuals, rather than obviously representatives of your institution. You're all now panelists, so you can unmute and talk and have your camera on, as I mentioned. And then obviously for best experience, we encourage you to toggle your view to side-by-side gallery view. So you can do this on the top right-hand corner of the Zoom panel, or so they tell me. And then feel free to share sound bites from what you learned today on LinkedIn and social. Just don't attribute any of it to any specific sources without confirming with them. Now, within those constraints, as I've mentioned, and we'll continue to reiterate, we're looking for feedback, dialogue, discussion. Why are we here today? We're excited to talk to you about a new category that we're calling integrated law. For us at Factor, it's our vision for the future of our business. It's our vision for the category we aim to create in the broader legal market and ecosystem. This vision is rooted in the point of view we've developed around the legal innovation market and why we believe it's progressed so slowly. Our point of view may implicitly be a critique of some of the underlying premises and assumptions that has driven the legal innovation to date, including some of the kind of ideas and hypotheses we had here at Factor, or previously I may have had at other firms as I've spent my majority of my career in the legal services market. The results of these faulty premises, these faulty ideas, has, we believe, misdirected innovation or potentially self-limited it in allowing the industry to really flourish, grow, and have the evolution that I know everyone's been clamoring for, that everyone's been talking about, that hundreds of articles and blog posts and panels at conferences have discussed. More than this being kind of, I'd say, Factor's guiding strategy, we believe the ideas behind integrated law should really form what we think is a new dialogue in the industry broadly. And it's a dialogue that we think the industry needs to have, right? We've had, like I said, versions of this in New York and London. We're now doing this virtually, and we're going to have more of these discussions in person and virtually in the near future. But as we advance to kind of the, to the next slide, and you look around the virtual room, once again, if you turn on your cameras, that would make it a bit easier. But we're joined here by seasoned legal industry thought leaders, representative of, I'd say, clients of either Factor or markets that we serve in the banking, telecom, and life sciences industry. And then finally, some participants from across the legal tech market, big law, new law, legal tech, and even folks that, potentially may be deemed as competitors. We look forward to connecting to each and every one of you. Ultimately, we come to this discussion with a core premise that we think legal innovation is ripe for disruption, ripe for the next chapter, and we believe integrated law is a category we're creating in conjunction with this ecosystem, with this community that's joined us here and in other forums and conversations to really tackle the next chapter of legal evolution. So to that effect, I want to introduce my colleague, Chris DeConti, who will kind of kick us off.
Thanks, Varun. Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining today. I will say that a lot of the ideas that we'll talk about today are ideas that we at Factor have been sort of marinating on for a long time. In my own case, they go back nearly 25 years when I first sort of put my head into the legal space. I was working at a company called the Corporate Executive Board. It's now owned by Gartner. And I had the opportunity to lead their market launch of a group called the General Counsel Roundtable that's grown since to include around 2,000 general counsels of the world's biggest companies. And the way we launched it was to go around and ask a few hundred GCs, what are the most pressing problems that they'd like us to research, that they'd like us to try to help them solve? And this is, just to really date myself, in the late 90s. And the three topics that they put forward were, one, I'm constantly being asked to do more with less. The demand for in-house legal services is far outstripping the supply of my budget. Number two, I love my law firms, but they're much too expensive and getting too expensive, more expensive all the time. And third, my people really want a seat at the table. They really want to be respected as business partners, because otherwise this in-house legal job can become a grind. That was the view of a few hundred GCs 25 years ago. And I'd say it's probably safe to say it's still the view of lots of GCs today. And in fact, we at Factor refer to this sort of trio of problems that is very much alive and well today as the unholy trinity, sort of affectionately referred to here in pink as the squeeze, the shock, and the sorrow. The more for less squeeze that GCs live under, the ever higher hourly bill rates, and this feeling of being underappreciated and underfulfilled. And these problems have persisted for at least 25 years, despite lots of good effort at innovation. And that innovation broadly aimed at trying to alleviate these problems. So, think of in the last 25 years, the birth and growth of the new law industry, the rise of legal tech, attracting upwards of $1 billion a year in investment, and the birth and growth of the legal operations function, and lots of other forums like Clock and others aimed at sort of thinking about and addressing these problems. But I think if we're honest, you'd have to say that that innovation hasn't moved the dial much. Alternative legal providers still account for less than 5% of total corporate spend. Not much has changed there. Some interesting survey data here with 70% in one survey of business people not viewing lawyers as technologically competent. Similarly, lots of business people saying they would avoid going through legal if they could. So sort of far from that position of a valued business partner. If we sort of take as a starting point that this unholy trinity persists, with most GCs saying that they're expected to make budget cuts even as their workloads increase, with profits per partner and rates continuing their journey upward, and far too many lawyers reporting anxiety, depression, or other mental health issues. It's like all that innovation hasn't bought us much so far. And the question becomes why? And as Varun referred to, we believe a lot of that innovation was sort of built on a faulty premise. And the faulty premise, and here I'm talking broadly about legal innovation, I want to make that clear. It's new law, it's legal managed services, it's legal tech, it's legal operations, all that in one way or another, we believe we're sort of built around a faulty view of the industry. Specifically about the nature of the work that keeps corporate legal teams busy. And I think to get into that, you can sort of go back to this graphic that probably looks familiar to lots of people on the phone, on the call. This is one that I date back to around 2010. I was at Axiom at that time. We at Axiom and lots of other companies went around the market sort of drawing some version of this graphic that was really meant to explain how does this new thing called new law fit into the ecosystem. And it was a pretty simple conception here saying, okay, imagine the ecosystem as this pyramid, and as you move up the pyramid, complexity, risk, and the value of work goes up, and as you go down, it goes down. And so law firms sit at the top of that pyramid. New law you could think of at the bottom of the pyramid, and in-house somewhere in between. You know, sort of the idea being that the rarest work in the ecosystem is the most complex, and the most abundant work in the ecosystem is the least complex. But that doesn't square with what clients tell us with how they describe their workloads at all. And it's an idea that we've come to call the commoditization myth, that legal tech or legal managed services aimed at commoditizing legal work, at standardizing it, at ironing out all of its complexity, while maybe a worthy goal, hasn't really been realized. And we'd argue that it's that this premise is wrong. The most abundant work in the ecosystem isn't the simplest. The most abundant work in the ecosystem does require some judgment, does require some sophisticated handling. And we'd say that this has been true for the last 25 years, and it's probably becoming more true every day, with everyday work becoming more, not less complex, as the world becomes more global and new geographies need to be considered, as regulations layer one on top of the other with GDPR and anti-corruption and sanctions compliance, industry-specific regulations, with the proliferation of new business models and the new economy, and new considerations like ESG or crypto or supply chain security, all of these things that sort of filter into everyday work to make them more complex. This phenomenon is what we call complex legal work at scale. It's work that is routine, but complex, that sort of flies in the face of this notion that over the last 10 or 20 years, to describe work as routine was sort of synonymous with commoditized. And we don't buy into the notion that just because work is frequently recurring, it's simple. And we believe that work, work that is both routine and complex, is the gap that's been left behind in the market, left behind by this misdirected innovation. But what do we mean by this idea of complexity? Here we're actually borrowing some really good work from a thinker in this industry that some of you may know, Jayom, who talks about 3 types of complexity that we've layered onto this old pyramid, old triangle graphic here. So up at the top, you know, the one we all think of, which is the legal complexity, where law firms have been the sort of logical masters of that work. But there are 2 other flavors of complexity. In the lower left, scale complexity, the complexity that comes from having to do a lot of something. think here about the e-discovery space, where the work isn't legally complex, but there's great complexity that comes with handling gargantuan volumes of data. That is its own art, its own skill, and new law has been the sort of master of that scale complexity. And in the lower right corner, this idea of systemic or cultural complexity. This is the idea that legal work in a big company doesn't happen in an ivory tower. It happens in the context of company guidelines, corporate stakeholders, internal in-house IT systems and databases, and business approval processes, all of which need to be navigated and that bring their own form of complexity, over which in-house lawyers have been the sort of traditional masters. And you can see, if we think about the ecosystem around these, oriented around these three flavors of complexity, you've got a kind of logical distribution of work in the system, with law firms owning that most legally complex sort of one-off company work. New law owning high volume commoditized work, and in-house lawyers performing their sort of core function of recurring in-house advisory. That sort of art of being an in-house lawyer that is about balancing your company's commercial objectives with legal risk in a way that only an in-house lawyer can do. Thinking about the world this way makes some sense, but you can think about a gap right in the center of this triangle around work that doesn't fit neatly into any one of these three corners, but sort of touches all of them. This is legal work that requires some expertise, but occurs frequently at enough scale that you want to think about efficiency in handling it. It's not money, cost is no object sort of work. And it's transactional in nature, requiring that sort of close business integration that's typically been associated with in-house law. This is the work, again, that we refer to as complex legal work at scale. And we believe that work, sort of drawing from all three corners of this ecosystem, in order to be handled successfully, it really does need a blend of all three sort of players in the current ecosystem. The legal expertise and market know-how, credibility of traditional law firms, but along with that, the tech-enabled, process-driven efficiency of new law, as well as the sort of business proximity, business know-how, stakeholder and process alignment of in-house law. The intersection of these three, the sort of integration of these three sets of skills, is what we call integrated law. We believe it is distinct from any of the three existing categories within the ecosystem. It's its own category, and we'd argue it's a really significant category. On the left here, this is some data on total corporate legal spend, showing new law at less than 5%, in-house with just over half, and law firms getting just under half on average of total legal spend today. We believe that even as new law continues to grow, so some work is commoditized and can be pushed into that channel, even with that, we believe integrated law could grow to be as much as 25 or 30% of the market. And that really just a function of this sort of recurring transactional work. Our clients tell us is, if not the majority, the plurality of what they're handling in-house, representing a huge market that isn't well served by any of the existing players. It's certainly been handled traditionally by in-house lawyers, but it's done at the expense often of their sort of advisory function that sort of valued business partner role that they've been eager to take on.